Welcome to 5 at 5 with Stone Law Offices. I'm attorney Brendan Bybee with 5 minutes on pot trusts for children. Now, many of us are creating trusts and estate plans primarily to provide for our children. And when our children are young, we may have different concerns and different administration of the trust than we might have once they're older. Now, it's a terrible thing to consider, that we may have minor children that are left behind upon our deaths. But for those of us who do have minor children and are planning on our estates and planning for their provision, one of the things that you might consider is a pot trust. Now, what that means is instead of having the trust distribute out evenly, each child gets their own share upon your death. If your children are very young, that might change that analysis a little bit. If you have some children that are older, perhaps you lived long enough to help them through college or cover certain expenses that some of the younger children have not had covered for them upon your passing. That's one reason that we might use a pot trust, and I'll talk about a little bit. Another situation is the fact that if you have very young children who are all minors, or many of whom are minors, there's just the administrative burden of having multiple separate trusts for individual children and a trustee that has to manage those for them and consider, okay, I'm taking so much out of this trust for that child, so much out of this trust for that child. When all the children are together, maybe under the same guardian and with the same guardian under the same roof, and all have similar expenses. Now, that's where a pot trust can be very beneficial for those young children. For one thing, what that means as a pot trust is we all have it in one single pot for the whole group of children. And generally speaking, we continue to keep that in a pot, in a single fund for the children all together until the youngest child is a certain age or hits some certain milestone. A typical pot trust that we might put together could say, this trust stays together for all of the children until the youngest child graduates from college or turns the age 25, whichever happens sooner. Now, we can adjust that based on any number of factors, different triggers, different ages, but that's something that might be very typical. And what you get there is now all the minor children are all taken care of with the same fund. We might say, okay, if there's enough funds here, the trustee can make certain expenses out to the children, which will be sort of an advance on their future inheritance. Otherwise, once the youngest child hits that age, now we're going to split this up into equal shares, and everybody's going to get their own share. This has some advantages in that, again, during the administrative phase while the children are young, there's no parsing, how much do I spend on clothes for this child versus that child, and having multiple trusts with multiple tax ID numbers and having to administer all of those as separate individual trusts. That's obviously a different picture, and a pot trust can be pretty handy in that case. The other part of that is, when we do divide this up, again, is it fair to say, okay, I'm just taking care of the kids all together now that they're older? Is it fair to say, okay, this one had more health problems, I want to take more out of their share for those health problems? Or are we really just trying to get them to adulthood and cared from that point on? Another part of that is, okay, if you've got older kids and you were able to support them through some level of education, you were able to pay for some of college or something like that, now you've got a trust that says, okay, until all of the kids have gone through college, this trust is going to stay together. If this child decides not to go to college, okay, that expense won't go out for them, but we're going to continue to use all the funds together to pay for everybody else who does, maybe with some parameters on that, and always with the trustee being able to make those adjustments and decisions based on the budget of what's actually there for the kids. But basically allows the trust fund to be there to support all of the children so that the younger children and the older children all get that kind of support. And then at the end, everything that's left over then gets divided out amongst the kids now that they're old enough to perhaps manage that trust for themselves, or at least old enough that they're under different roofs, different lives, and makes sense for them to have their own separate trust. If you have young children, or if you're giving funds to grandchildren, but if you have young children that you're providing for, And in spite of the fact that it's unlikely and hopefully never happens, certainly that's why we do planning, is to plan for things that we don't expect, but we know are inevitable, but hope don't happen anytime soon. Get that planning done. Consider how you're providing for those young children, and look at your trust. And if you need a review, come by. Let's take a look at it and see if perhaps a pot trust or some other solution will work for you and for your family. Thanks.